welcome everyone again. Great to have this panel. I have to say, it's been really hard for me scribbling lots and lots of notes as I've been talking. Just the volume of quality content that was shared, the thought process that you've triggered, all of you. Joe, Randeep, of course, helping us reimagine, and Alana giving us a view of how we can roll out this for New Zealand. And then, of course, Swapnindu, generally the man who helps us shape our thinking of what the future could look like, giving us a bit of a reality check as well. So I think I am really looking forward to this panel session. I might use the opportunity also to include some of the questions from the audience. But I wanted to first of all start with Her Excellency Joe Tyndall, just to kind of get things moving. I mean, we talked about digital trade, and we'll get into a lot more nuances that everyone's referred to today. But Joe, this was when we spoke a few times about it, and I know this has been a great couple of years from a New Zealand-Singapore partnership perspective. First with the enhanced partnership, which was inked last year, and again, we're very proud to have been involved in showcasing that event in Wellington last year. But and then this year to follow it up with DIPA. When you spoke to me the last time, you referenced the fact that this has the potential to extend beyond the current partners, which are New Zealand, Singapore, and Chile. So given that we have audience joining us from different parts of the world, where do you see the potential for this to extend beyond New Zealand, Singapore, and Chile?
Well, I think that's really a question of who might be interested. It's a question both of interest and also, I guess, preparedness to apply and live by the rules and standards that are set out in the DIPA agreement. Alana will probably definitely be better placed than I am to talk about joining or an accession a strategy, but it's my understanding that it's still a little bit in development and in a matter of discussion amongst the three initial partners. As we said, and Alana mentioned, the agreement hasn't formally entered into force yet. We're hoping it's close, but it needs 2 out of the 3 as a minimum members to domestically ratify the treaty, and at that point it enters into force. So yes, I guess the idea is to have it open, definitely be encouraging and supporting those who wish to join, but I'll leave Alana to talk a little bit further in what that might entail.
Great, thank you.
Shall I just chip in?
Yeah, absolutely, please.
Great. I don't actually have that much more to say to Jo. As she said, we want this to grow. We want it to expand. We want new economies to join into the process to help add value. And basically, the minimum standard is you have to be able to meet the standards of the DIPA. We're not looking to go backwards in any way. What we do hope is that new parties who join bring new ideas and are prepared and enthused to get involved in that cooperation. So it's not something where, if people are looking to collect large numbers of treaties and not do very much with them, DIPA is probably not for them. But for someone who is equally interested in really getting into some of these really, really nitty-gritty pieces of work down the track, then DIPA should present a really exciting opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And since since we're in a phase where we're operationalizing this between the partners, I thought this might be a good opportunity for me to jump over to Swapnindu. So, we have talked over the last 12 months about a topic, and you referenced that earlier in your session. Actually, you referenced a few points, and I wanted to bring all of them into one piece. You referenced trusted data, and I know you've talked about the importance of data sharing between economies. You referenced payments, integrated payments, or more seamless payments mechanisms beyond economies. So I wanted to share a few thoughts and see what you think of it. New Zealand and Singapore both, given that we have this DPA deal now, and New Zealand and Singapore both share very similar ethos in general, in terms of our focus on people, but at the same time, very, very strong norms around, probably among the best, around data privacy and governance norms across both the countries. Second, Singapore in its current context is very advanced in terms of digital payments. But to put it into perspective, New Zealand was one of the first countries to literally go cashless, with FPOS 3 decades ago, right? And that has been a phenomenal journey. And I remember before I moved to New Zealand, if I had $10 in my wallet, that was a lot of money I was carrying around with me because I never needed to pull out cash. Given this, these two factors, do you think there is an opportunity for New Zealand and Singapore to be collaborating a lot more from a from a FinTech payment, and of course, because all of this accelerates digital trade?
Sure, absolutely. I think when people say they're a cashless society, they probably ignore the fact that people who procure the goods are not necessarily cashless. Because when you procure a good from India or China or Philippines in New Zealand, that process will be highly non-digital. It may seem to you that as a consumer in New Zealand, you are using a lot of credit card, a lot of cashless payment, but the underlying economic rails which brings that goods to Singapore, to a country, may not be cashless. They may be the payments between the two companies are still being in an old-fashioned way. The processes which is connecting them are still paper processes being exchanged. In my mind, you truly call yourself cashless, where your cash payment is embedded with your asset transfer, which means when I'm moving my goods, at the exactly same time, the money is also moving. That's a true end-state cashless society, where you are not only connecting the goods and services as they move, they're also moving payment rails on the same time. And this is domestic. If you extend globally, you got to find a way with your trading partner. And your question was Singapore. If I think New Zealand and Singapore, if they truly want to be a cashless economy and a cashless trade partner, they got to find a way together to connect the payment rails. Very bare minimum, because you can't have a e-trade, a digital trade running on a system which is not connected. So having a payment connectivity should be an imperative for policymakers to think as we pursue our partner, because we have a good natural partnership between the two countries in terms of how we look at digital transformation. Our belief in digital economy is quite high. We're going to find a way to connect our payment system. That's to me a minimum hygiene. Start thinking about the new digital reset. On the data side, I think both countries have high trust factor. They're trusted economy, and they have a strong policy governance around data protection. Having that strong policy framework domestically gives the opportunity both countries to exchange data on a trusted corridor. I use the word trusted corridor, where two parties are trusted. There's equivalence in the rules and the policies and legality of protecting data exchange between the two countries. So we have the right policy framework, the right mindset, and the right construct, a right domestic infrastructure. We've got to find a way to connect this in a real world so that we can truly run our e-commerce on this trusted rail much more thoughtfully. And I use the word step away from productivity and efficiency, move to resiliency and sustainability.
Mute.
You got into mute.
Sorry. My apologies. I said the most profound thing, and I can't remember what it was. But just in terms of what you were saying, I wanted to link this to, as a linkage into a question from the audience, and I'm going to open this up to the panel to answer that. The question is, often trade and trade agreements are focused on large businesses, and to your point, Sop, I think for digital trade, SMEs need to be fully immersed into this process, right? Because 97% of our businesses are SMEs. So in practice, is there anything tangible that could be done to connect SMEs into each other's markets? Will DIPA support this? If so, how? So I might pose this to Alana first, and then maybe get the other panelists to contribute if they have something to say.
Thanks. And I think the short answer is yes, absolutely. That's what DIPA is about. I talked about in my presentation around the SME dialogue. This is the first time we've ever hardwired that into a treaty. So some of the ideas, we try and incorporate that in how we implement existing trade agreements, but this is something that actually we have an obligation in international law to do. And so that is something that's quite different. As I said, we're completely open-minded about what that looks like. It can be policymakers talking, and it can be businesses talking, and it can just be talk and exploration of ideas, or it could be an opportunity to be far more commercial in nature as well. And so I suspect it's going to be a combination of all of those elements. But that is a specific activity. But what we want to feed in is how all of those modules evolve over time as we get to something like digital identities. I just saw there was a specific question around that, and blockchain, and what DIPA might do with that. Now, blockchain is, of course, one technology to achieve an objective. As we learn more about what this means in an international context, and what we need to be committing governments to do, so to mean that countries have to do certain things, that we can then think about what rules might need to be written into the DIPA and into other contexts as well. So at the moment, all of those frontier issues we know are really important, and we know that business are living and breathing them right now, but it's just not yet clear what the problems at the international level are that we need to solve through actually creating rules. But again, it comes down to, we hope DIPA is another element in the New Zealand-Singapore relationship, and of course in the New Zealand-Singapore-Chile relationship as well, around just actually getting firms thinking about us as partners and the opportunity, and reinforcing that message that NZ tech is really interesting, innovative, and we're natural partners. We don't just produce high quality food and beverage.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's a great segue into a question I have for you, Bradley.
Sorry, Amit, can I just quickly, I just want to bring this thought to the panelists here, especially High Commissioner here. When we tell SMEs to digitize and ask them to connect, there are many mountains to cross to get there. And we should not get misled by partnership. When we say partnership, by two companies connecting to each other. To me, that's not a true connectivity. The true connectivity comes where a small producer in New Zealand, without any partnership with a large corporate, can actually connect to a small buyer in Singapore through an open public good rails, where they have access to all possible digital tools, and where they can trade seamlessly at both sides by processing their goods, by exchanging certificates, by moving payments, getting the custom clearance, all the process through digital services, and without putting a lot of physical effort to get that thing done. I think if you ask a small SME, it is just too much of complicated process today. And what they do essentially, they end up sourcing their product to a large buyer who again sources to another large buyer, and end up being part of a too large company just doing trade among themselves. I think the challenge for all of us is to how to translate that to and make it more democratic. When I say democratic, is to build more public good which will connect SMEs point to point without depending on large corporate intermediaries in between.
And having read specifically around the deeper modules, SOP, to that point, I think the provisions in that are actually geared towards those. If I may jump in, High Commissioner and Alana, because it references to paperless trade and streamlining the customs processes and removing tariffs on digital transactions and e-invoicing and e-payments and so on. So there is provision for that, but I think Swapnindra makes a really good point. I don't know if High Commissioner, yourself or Alana would like to comment on that.
I think a critical point is to note that DEPA is kind of a beginning, or at least it's not the end point along the digital highway at all. And Alana very clearly identified that, particularly in the new frontier areas, we've just done a placeholder at this stage, saying we need the input of ideas and so on to be able to work out what sort of rules, if any, are needed, and with what objective, in terms of either facilitating trade or providing protections that might need to be in place. So it's definitely not a done and dusted thing. I think what Alana has also pointed out is that by setting up a format for dialogue, but also actively looking for inputs, then that allows us to make some progress with problem identification. And Sop, I think you've really sort of certainly enlightened me with some of your thinking today. But problem identification, but also the beginnings of problem solution. And again, as Alana said, some of that problem solution may need to be done through further development of rules or standards or norms, whatever we call them under DEPA, but they may not all need further regulation to be solved. Some of them clearly need government to government sort of understandings to provide the basis on which things can happen. But it may not be that that's the case for everything. And I think at this stage, it's a really important part of the process to try and sort through, to triage, if you like, because there's so much DEPA could do and so many areas it could look into further. We have to do a little bit of sorting and think, well, what can we prioritize? Where can we focus to begin with? And the getting the basics right, for example, and how can we make sure that the placeholders we've got in there, if, for example, in the new frontier issues, how can we make sure we understand where we can focus the work to develop deeper and provide the right trading and economic conditions for it to actually operate.
Great. Thank you, High Commissioner. And so Bradley, I've got the perfect sort of lead in to you. We've talked what Alana mentioned, and Swapnindra touched on it, and then the High Commissioner around what are the problems we're trying to solve. And obviously, given that New Zealand is a very advanced agrarian economy, where agri-tech plays a big role, and we're talking about that tomorrow. But food security, food safety, food assurance, whatever we want to call it, they're big problem to solve globally. Now we've talked about blockchain, we're talking about identity, transparency. Where do you see the opportunity for us to learn from some of the problems that we have to solve and work backwards to reverse engineer the solutions that we can build.
Thanks so much, and thanks for bringing me into this fantastic group of panelists. So on that specific question, I mean, there are all sorts of opportunities, I think, around digital agriculture and precision agriculture, helping reduce inputs, reduce cost, not just for farmers in the rich parts of the world, not just for farmers in New Zealand, but say in Indonesia and in Africa and elsewhere. So certainly lots of potential there. But kind of going back to Sopnendu's broader comments about the pandemic and digital acceleration, or in fact what might be better called like a distorted, more monopolistic sort of digital acceleration across the world. So I represent the United Nations, so my job is to be inherently optimistic, right? So I'm trying to find silver linings and in everything, but we do think that there really is a kind of silver lining behind this digital acceleration, particularly for post-pandemic provoked, maybe distorted digital acceleration. And we think that there's an opportunity, especially in the developing world, for countries to benefit sort of in an outsized way, right? In a few different areas, and especially around, we think, digital agriculture, helping farmers, say, in remote parts of Indonesia or Laos through digital farming and precision agriculture that reduces their cost, through digital finance when it can work, and in areas like virtual learning or telemedicine. So virtual learning isn't so great if you're sitting in Singapore or Auckland or Wellington or Hong Kong, but it might be the only option if you're sitting in somewhere in rural Sierra Leone, right? And the same with with telemedicine. It's not great to have to do that with your doctor if you're sitting where we're sitting right now, but again, it might be the only opportunity in rural parts of Africa. So how do we accelerate that? How do we make that happen faster, right? If that's the best the sort of scenario. So that's a kind of question I'd like to sort of throw back to the panelists, and what are the opportunities here for the rest of the world, for the developing world, which shouldn't be forgotten, but rather seen also as market opportunities for folks that are working on, for example, FinTech in Singapore or agri-tech out of New Zealand. So I'd love Sopnendu and maybe Randeep's perspective on those questions. Like how do we amplify, accelerate the opportunities of this, okay, albeit distorted digital acceleration, but for the developing world in particular?
Yeah, specifically around what you touched on, Bradley, the social safety nets. How do we better enhance those?
To be clear, what's happened in sub-Saharan Africa for example, with the pandemic, I mean, it's not so much it's terrible in terms of the health systems that kind of didn't even exist and people getting sick and have no health system, but what's happened is the global food supply has broken down, right? So people are dying of hunger, right, because of the pandemic. So these are the sort of secondary, tertiary effects of the pandemic that people don't even kind of realize. But so how do we use digital promise to fix things like this? But back to you guys.
Yeah, so I'm going to point this to Randeep. Randeep, you stretched our imaginations to help us reimagine. So I'm going to pose this question to you around the social safety nets, as Bradley just discussed.
Yes, so I think what Bradley mentioned is certainly, a very challenging problem. And obviously, if you want to create social safety nets, you need resources and you need the wherewithal to be able to put them in place. But one thing which perhaps technology should be leveraged for is that at the moment, the social safety nets are generic, right? So it's the same thing for everybody below a particular income level. I feel that going forward, a social safety net will have to be highly personalized and customized to the specific needs and context of an individual, or of a family. It cannot be generic because generic is also wasteful of resources in some sense. So if we could, devise systems which capture data better on the individual and are able to factor in that data to customize a response. So say if somebody falls ill, now that's a different proposition as compared to somebody who, say, loses a job. So the social safety net piece needs to be reimagined in the sense of being more data intensive and being more responsive and more personalized and customized to be able to mount a response to this. And perhaps in the process, to optimize and reduce the outflow of resources that would be required to sustain this.
Yeah. And if I could just jump in for a second too, to respond. I mean, like the whole notion around digital public goods is a super interesting one. And around open data, open AI, and so forth. But we're just starting on that, right? And it will take so much more work. So what is there to do kind of in the interim beyond setting up like what Singapore set up in terms of Veritas and sort of good governance for digital? How do we if the digital divide it's sort of a law of mathematics or economics that if you accelerate digital transformation, you accelerate the digital divide, and then the cost, all right, the opportunity cost, if you are left behind, is worse and worse. As it gets better for a few, it gets worse and worse for a lot more. So how do we figure that out? I mean, these are super challenging questions, but one is to how do we figure out how to remove bias, for example, in digital ID, remove the bias from algorithms so that people are counted in the proper way and so forth. But again, would love to hear from others on the panel on these questions. So,
sorry, I think Alana, you want to say something?
I have so much to say on this topic. Yeah, I agree. It's really, really hard. But now is the opportunity to start to get into these questions. So on the open data part, there's only so much we can do at a national level, but we are doing very focused on that. So New Zealand launched an agri-tech strategy last week, and data and efficiency of production is a key part of that. Now, the agri-tech strategy is about the production, but also about the tech. So, which we're then hoping to, of course, sell overseas as well. So that then delivers benefits for production in other places. But I know that there's discussions in the FAO context around how to best use data to support things. But equally, so governments are part of it in terms of putting the framework in place to encourage sharing of data, to support firms to develop tech. But equally, it brings us back to those fundamental things that sit at the heart of the deeper, but also digital trade rules as it existed for a long time, around just actually what fundamental rules and framework are you putting in place as a government that facilitates business but also trust. So things like, how are you regulating data? Are companies, so a small New Zealand agri-tech software company, able to move data around? How are farmers able to trust that the data that's been collected from their property is not being misused? How do you protect privacy? And I actually, just before coming into the session, got a privacy breach email from somewhere. And so there's the cyber dimension as well. There's the AI ethics piece. And this is why in the deeper context, sorry to bring it back to deeper, but we've flagged all of these issues as ones that we absolutely need to have a really serious conversation about domestically and internationally. But because we know they're part of the problem and hopefully part of the solution, but we just don't know what the answers are. So we hope that deeper provides a hook for governments, experts, industry to all have that conversation and hopefully lift public good.
I think I think I was thinking is to the question of Bradley that in fact the brightest example during crisis of the true digital benefit did come from emerging market. If you look at optimism as and look for bright spots, that's an irony, not from developed economy. It never came from there. And there's a good example in India. There's a place in Gujarat where women self-help group were able to sustain the crisis because they had a sustainable pension plan before the crisis. And they were not only able to sustain themselves, in fact, the deposit, they had a deposit growth in the banks where they bank with. It's called, I think, Seva Bank or some bank, like I can't recollect the name. So you can see that a true digital transformation at the bottom of the pyramid does translate to real benefit, right? And best place to test this crisis is this crisis itself. But let me answer the question around public good. I think public good could be misunderstood in many sense. When we say public good means is an ownership question, is a question of provenance, is a question of pricing, is a question of proprietary. I think we got to declutter each of them and understand when we talk about open public good. I think the interest of time, in my mind, a public good is where equality in access is maintained, and these public goods are connected globally, and there are governance, policy governance, or jurisdiction governments around managing these public rails, be it data, be it payment rails, be it ID, and then and there's a mechanism to allow all the apps, all the digital tools being built on top of that can run on systems which is trusted, predictable, scalable, and remains available always and at any point of time. So to me, that's the true definition of open public rail. Open doesn't mean that people are mandated to open up the data set. Open means that there are mechanisms, there's an infrastructure which allows people to share data under a certain principle of fair play and sustainable contribution by every party to an open data set. So that's to me a definition of an open data services. And lastly, to end, I would end with one thing we got to solve, and the crisis has truly shown us that we got to get our minds behind a globally sustainable pension plan. I think we are constantly pushing that can down the street every time there's a crisis comes and shifting the dialogue to more upstream discussion. We have to go back and find a way to allow people, the citizens of the world, to have a sustainable system which allows them to dip into that savings or a pension structure when crisis comes. And this is not the first time crisis is going to come. More crises are going to come down in years to come, but we got to quickly solve that problem. Not solving the problem is going to give us further painful experience as you get to the crisis.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sop. That was, I think you encapsulated a whole bunch of points there. I just wanted to touch on sustainability. I mean, you touched on inclusion. I wanted to shift a little bit to environmental sustainability and other aspects of sustainability. We're privileged to have the High Commissioner who used to be New Zealand's ambassador to the UN for climate change. So she's she's not new to the subject of sustainability and the environment. And it is sustainability is a core ethos embedded into our Maori culture in New Zealand. So, High Commissioner, anything that you'd like to add where you see digital trade and role the broader sort of digital economy can play in driving these sustainability goals for us?
I think you're asking me the hard questions today, Amit. In fact, I'm definitely old to the climate change ambassador role. So I can't say that what I have is particularly fresh insights. I don't know that, I don't believe that the digital aspect of this has been a feature of discussions or has been properly explored up until now. But in a small area like agriculture, I think there have been a couple of references, Bradley and Alana, to the digital aspects of that, and how, for example, digital tools and the use of digital technology can help in lower carbon, cost efficient, and better, more productive agricultural production through, for example, the very precise and careful use of inputs like water or whatever they might be, or fertilizer, to grow crops or to grow food in ways that are much less resource intensive than they may have been in the past. There are probably a myriad examples of what that can look like, and it doesn't have to be high tech. It can be quite low tech, that smallholder farmers in developing countries can use purely on the basis of their phones. They might have, rather than needing anything massively high tech to deliver it. But I do think there are a huge number of opportunities that we're probably only at the very edge of beginning to think about and put into place that do that reduce inputs, that get people to understand through the use of data, for example, how they are benchmarking compared with others, and you can apply that to home consumption of electricity, for example, with smart meters and with mechanisms that tell you how you, as an individual, are doing compared with your neighbours, and therefore what you can do to reduce your energy use and in a win-win, reduce your costs as a consumer.